In the soft morning light filtering through the nursery window, a small golden puppy opened his eyes for the very first time. The world swam into focus through a haze of warm gold and gentle shadows. Max's vision was blurry, his tiny ears still folded against his head, but he could sense the presence of his mother nearby and the warm bodies of his siblings pressed close against him. The scent of fresh straw and the distant smell of green meadows drifted through the open window, carrying with it the promise of endless possibilities. His mother, Bella, a magnificent golden retriever with a coat that shimmered like honey in sunlight, nuzzled him softly. She had given birth to 5 puppies in total, and even in these first moments, the difference was unmistakable. While his 4 siblings were robust and sturdy, with paws that seemed oversized even now, Max was delicate, almost ethereal. His littermates already jostled and pushed with confident strength, their voices strong and demanding. Max, by contrast, found his own cry was smaller, though no less determined. The first days passed in a gentle rhythm of sleeping and feeding, of growing accustomed to the sounds and textures of this new existence. The estate beyond the nursery was vast and full of life. Through the window, Max could hear the distant sounds of other animals moving about their day, the calls of herding dogs and the cheerful barks of the community that lived here. This was no ordinary place. The sprawling countryside estate had been home for generations to dogs of all kinds, each with their own gifts and talents. It was a place where character mattered more than appearance, though few understood this truth yet. As Max's eyes opened wider and his ears began to stand, his siblings grew more boisterous. They tumbled over one another with unself-conscious exuberance, their larger frames dominating the nursery space. Buddy, the largest of the litter, seemed to take up half the room by himself. Dakota was nearly as big. Even little Sophie, as their mother called her, towered over Max by a considerable margin. When they played, they pushed and wrestled with the kind of physical confidence that came naturally to their size. Max found himself often on the outside of these games, his small frame making it difficult to compete in their rough and tumble world. But something curious happened during those early weeks of wrestling and play. While Max could not match his siblings' strength or size, he possessed something else entirely. His movements were impossibly quick. When Buddy charged toward him, Max could pivot and dart away with an ease that seemed almost magical. When Dakota attempted to pin him down, Max had already slipped sideways, his tiny paws moving with a grace that belied his small size. His mother watched these encounters with thoughtful eyes, and something knowing seemed to shimmer in her gaze. One afternoon, when Max was nearly 6 weeks old, he discovered the training grounds beyond the nursery. An older dog named Chester, a wise border collie with a graying muzzle, was overseeing some puppies from other litters as they practiced their movements. They were jumping over small obstacles and navigating through carefully arranged poles. Chester's eyes found Max as he approached, and a slow smile spread across his weathered face. That evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Max stood alone in the nursery for a moment. His siblings were sleeping in a contented pile, their large bodies sprawled across the soft bedding. Max approached the wooden floor where the sunbeams streamed through the window, and he began to move. He didn't jump or run aggressively. Instead, he simply let his body follow the path of the light, moving with surprising fluidity for such a tiny creature. His paws barely made a sound against the wood. His movements seemed to flow like water, like the very light itself. It was in this solitary moment, with the warmth of the sun on his small golden coat and the quiet of the estate settling around him, that something shifted inside his small chest. He felt no sadness about his size, no regret about his smallness. Instead, there was only a growing sense of possibility, a whisper of something greater than himself calling out from somewhere deep within. As he watched the sunbeams dance across the wooden floor, Max felt something stirring deep within his tiny heart, a dream too big for such a small body. The nursery seemed to shrink as Max's siblings grew, their voices booming louder with each passing day. Rocky, his oldest brother, could now stretch his front paws nearly to the windowsill, while Bella knocked over the food bowls with a single wag of her powerful tail. Max remained small, his paws delicate as a rabbit's, his frame still wrapped in the soft fluff of puppyhood, while his littermates developed muscle and presence that filled every corner of their shared space. It was during the afternoon rest when the teasing began in earnest. Rocky had returned from the training grounds, his chest puffed with pride after watching the older dogs practice their jumps. He bounded into the nursery with theatrical flair, leaping over the low fence that contained the younger pups as though it were nothing. "Did you see that?" Rocky announced to no one in particular, though clearly to everyone. "I'm going to be faster than father by next season. Did you see how high I jumped? Easily twice as high as the fence." Max watched from his corner, his small body curled into itself. He had not been to the training grounds yet. At his size, it seemed hardly worth the journey. Bella giggled, a sound like wind chimes, and pounced playfully toward Max. "Look, little brother," she said, not unkindly, but with the thoughtless precision of youth. "Your entire body is smaller than my front paw. How will you ever reach the jump bars?" Max said nothing, but he felt the weight of her words settle into his small chest like stones into water. He turned away, pretending to sleep, though his heart pounded with a peculiar mixture of shame and something else he couldn't yet name. Something that felt almost like determination, though far too tender to voice aloud. Their mother was resting in the adjoining room when the teasing continued through the afternoon. Max heard her stir as the sun began its slow descent toward the meadows beyond the estate walls. She moved with the grace that came from many seasons of living and settled herself near the nursery gate, simply observing her growing children with ancient, knowing eyes. Rocky had returned to his boasting, describing in elaborate detail the architecture of the obstacle course he'd witnessed. Bella added commentary, and together they wove a narrative in which they were destined for the great championships, destined to carry the family name to heights never before achieved. Their voices were not cruel, truly, but they occupied all the space in the room, leaving none for anyone smaller. Their mother watched in silence for a long while. Then she rose and approached Max, who still feigned sleep in his corner. She lay down beside him, her warm body a shelter against the grown-up world beyond the nursery walls. "Come," she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. "Walk with me to the gardens." Max followed her through the golden afternoon light into the sprawling gardens that surrounded the estate. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the ancient oak that grew near the edge of the training grounds. Their mother settled beneath its broad canopy of leaves, and Max nestled against her side. "Your siblings speak often of size and speed," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the distant meadows. "These things are easily measured. They are plain for all to see." She paused, letting her paw rest gently on Max's small head. "But there are strengths that cannot be measured in pounds or height, my dear one. Some of the greatest victories come not from being the largest, but from having a heart larger than mountains, determination deeper than oceans, and a spirit that refuses to diminish." Max listened, his small body absorbing both her words and her warmth. He watched as the sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, creating dancing patterns on the ground before them. In that moment, something crystallized within him, not certainty, not yet, but possibility. As evening descended and the air grew cool, they returned to the nursery. Rocky and Bella were already deep in sleep, their boasts temporarily silenced by dreams. That night, Max curled against his mother's warm side and whispered a promise to himself that somehow, someday, he would prove that greatness wasn't about being the biggest. The moment Max's tiny paws touched the soft grass beyond the nursery for the first time, everything changed. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The cool, yielding earth beneath his delicate pads, the warmth of the afternoon sun painting golden strokes across his golden coat, and the vast openness stretching before him like an invitation to a world far larger than the cozy whelping box that had been his entire universe. His mother watched from the shade of the ancient oak tree, her expression tender and protective, while his littermates tumbled and wrestled nearby, their movements clumsy and exuberant. Max stood still for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of this threshold. The estate sprawled endlessly around him, rolling meadows dotted with wildflowers, training grounds marked with jumps and weaves in the distance, and the comfortable stone buildings where the community of dogs lived their purposeful lives. He took his first tentative step, then another, feeling his small body discover its own mysterious language. Something within him sang as his muscles engaged, as if they had always known exactly what to do. His paws found a natural rhythm that surprised even himself. Another step and another, each movement seeming to flow from some deep wellspring of instinct and grace. Before he could think too much about what his body was doing, curiosity overtook caution. A butterfly danced past, its wings flickering blue and white against the green landscape. Without conscious decision, Max launched himself forward, his tiny legs moving in perfect coordination, his body low and streamlined. He was fast, impossibly fast for such a small creature. The butterfly evaded him, but the pure joy of movement, the freedom of his own speed, made him continue running in expanding circles across the meadow. His littermates noticed and gave chase, but something remarkable happened. Max moved differently than they did. Where they bounded and crashed through the grass with enthusiastic abandon, Max's movements were precise, economical, elegant. He could change direction with barely a pause, his body responding to the subtle shifts in his thoughts before his mind had fully formed them. He could accelerate and decelerate with a smoothness that seemed impossible in a creature so young. One of the older dogs emerged from the training grounds, a distinguished German shepherd named Atlas, who had mentored many young prospects over the years. He paused on the hill overlooking the meadow, his keen eyes tracking the small golden form weaving through the grass with such surprising fluidity. Max eventually exhausted himself, tumbling into a patch of soft clover, his tiny chest heaving with exertion and happiness. His mother trotted over to him, her tongue gentle as she cleaned his face, her eyes shining with maternal pride. She had always believed in her smallest son, but even she seemed astonished by what she had just witnessed. As the afternoon light began its slow transformation toward evening, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, a shadow fell across Max. He looked up to find his father standing before him, Champion Sterling, the retired agility legend whose medals and ribbons adorned the great hall of the estate. Max had seen him only a few times, for his father spent most of his days in quiet reflection, watching from the sidelines as younger dogs trained and competed. Sterling was an imposing figure even in his age, his silver-touched muzzle speaking of countless victories, his bearing still noble and strong. Max felt suddenly small beneath that gaze, suddenly aware that his father had probably seen thousands of young dogs try their paws at movement and athleticism. But then something extraordinary happened. His father's eyes sparkled with recognition, and he bent down to whisper, "I see something special in you, little one, something that might just change everything." The estate stretched before Max like an endless golden landscape, dotted with tunnels, jumps, and weaving poles that seemed to touch the clouds. His small paws trembled as he took his first steps through the grand archway, his father walking beside him, with quiet pride radiating from every careful movement. The morning sun painted everything in shades of honey and amber, and the air itself felt thick with possibility and ancient magic. Max's eyes grew wider with each sight. To his left, a Great Dane named Atlas was gracefully weaving through poles that looked impossibly tall from Max's perspective, moving with a fluid elegance that belied his massive frame. To his right, a border collie named Zephyr was launching herself over a series of jumps with explosive power, her movements precise and calculated. Beyond them, a gentle basset hound named Duchess was navigating a tunnel with surprising speed, her long ears flowing behind her like silk ribbons catching the breeze. The training grounds were arranged in concentric circles, each area devoted to different challenges and disciplines. Max could see climbing walls that dogs scaled with their front paws, seesaws that required perfect balance, and water crossings where the surface sparkled with reflected sunlight. Mixed breeds worked alongside purebreds, small dogs receiving exactly the same attention and encouragement as the largest competitors. There was no hierarchy here based on size or strength, only skill and heart. His father led him down a winding path lined with flowering shrubs, their petals releasing a gentle perfume with each breeze. Other trainers called out greetings, nodding with respect as they passed. Max noticed that some of the dogs stopped their training to watch them, their expressions curious and welcoming rather than dismissive. A corgi named Chester trotted over with a friendly smile, and a chihuahua named Bella actually seemed excited to see another small dog on the grounds. They came to a pavilion at the center of the estate where an elderly Saint Bernard sat in the shade, watching the various dogs train with eyes that seemed to hold decades of wisdom. His name was Chancellor, his father explained softly, and he had been the keeper of the agility championships for more generations than anyone could count. It was Chancellor who had established the founding principle that would echo through all the competitions held here. The spirit of determination transcended the size of the body that carried it. Chancellor's deep voice rumbled like distant thunder as he welcomed Max to the grounds. He spoke of legendary champions from centuries past, dogs of every size and breed, who had proven that true excellence came from courage, focus, and an unbreakable will. He told stories of a Jack Russell who had won against odds that seemed impossible, of a greyhound who had learned to overcome her fears, of a Saint Bernard who had discovered grace despite his considerable weight. Max's father placed a paw gently on his son's back, and together they walked the perimeter of the training grounds. They watched dogs practice their routines, watched trainers offer encouragement and correction with equal kindness. Max saw that every dog, regardless of size, received personalized instruction tailored to their unique body and abilities. There was no single path to success here, only the individual journey toward becoming the best version of oneself. As the afternoon light began to shift, casting longer shadows across the golden landscape, Max's father brought him to a quiet spot overlooking the entire estate. From this vantage point, Max could see everything at once: the flowing movement of dogs in training, the patient instructors, the circular nature of the tracks and challenges, all arranged in perfect harmony beneath the endless sky. His father spoke quietly about the history of this place, about how it had been built on the belief that size was merely circumstance, not destiny. He shared that champions came in all shapes and forms, and that what separated the great from the merely good was something invisible but unmistakable, a certain quality of spirit that burned bright regardless of the body it inhabited. Standing at the edge of the training grounds, Max felt his tiny heart race with a certainty that made his whole body tingle. This was where he belonged. Under the spreading oak tree, Max met Sage, whose silver-flecked fur and gentle eyes seemed to hold 1,000 stories. The old sheepdog lay stretched across the cool ground, his weathered body resting in the dappled shade that filtered through the leaves above. Max had wandered away from the training grounds, needing a moment to process the overwhelming feelings that had washed over him. The vast meadow had seemed both infinite and somehow intimate, and his small paws had carried him here almost of their own accord. Sage lifted his head as Max approached, a knowing smile crossing his ancient face. There was no surprise in that expression, only a gentle recognition, as though he had been expecting this small visitor all along. Max felt suddenly shy, his earlier certainty giving way to the nervous flutter of meeting someone so clearly wise and experienced. "Come sit beside me," Sage said, his voice like honey warmed in sunlight, smooth and comforting. The old sheepdog shifted slightly, creating a cozy space in the shade where Max could settle. "There is room here for dreamers of all sizes." Max curled into the offered space, his small frame dwarfed by the old dog's broad side. For several long moments, they simply sat together in companionable silence, listening to the gentle sounds of the estate around them. Birds sang in the branches above. Somewhere in the distance, younger dogs called to each other during their training sessions. "You have the look of someone who has just discovered something important about themselves," Sage said softly, his eyes gazing out toward the training grounds that Max had left behind. "I do belong there," Max whispered, almost as though he was telling himself rather than the old sheepdog. "I felt it as soon as I saw the jumps and the weaving poles. But I am so small, and everyone else is so much bigger and stronger." Sage nodded slowly, as if Max had confirmed something he already knew. "Let me tell you about a champion named Sterling," the old sheepdog began, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence of someone who had shared wisdom many times before. "He was a Great Dane, a massive creature who could have easily dominated any competition. He won his first 3 championships with ease, his size and strength giving him clear advantages. But then, one winter, he injured himself during training. He could no longer run with the same power or confidence." "What happened to him?" Max asked, his small voice full of concern. "He watched from the sidelines as smaller dogs competed," Sage continued thoughtfully. "And he noticed something he had never seen before. The smallest among them, a terrier named Dot, moved through the courses with such precision and grace that her size became irrelevant. She won not because of strength, but because of focus and determination. Sterling learned that day that heart matters far more than size. When he returned to competition, he competed not to dominate, but to dance through the courses. He won his 4th championship, and it was the most meaningful victory of all." Max thought about this story as the afternoon light shifted slightly, creating new patterns on the ground beneath the old tree. The sun felt warm on his back, and somehow Sage's words seemed to settle into his small bones like ancient truth. "There have been many champions here over the years," Sage continued softly. "Not all of them were the largest, but all of them possessed something that no measurement could capture. They had the fire within, the absolute refusal to accept limitation. They trained with single-minded purpose. They believed in themselves when no one else did." The old sheepdog turned his head to look directly into Max's eyes. "You have that fire, little ones. I can see it burning in you. It will be harder for you in some ways, yes. You will need to work twice as hard, move twice as smart, and believe twice as strongly. But when you cross that finish line, when you complete a course that others thought impossible for a dog your size, that victory will mean something deeper than any trophy." Max felt tears forming in his small eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of recognition, of having been truly seen and understood by another soul. He leaned closer to Sage, resting his head against the old sheepdog's side. As the afternoon breeze rustled through the leaves, Max knew he had found not just a mentor, but a friend who truly understood his dream. The first jump seemed to tower above Max like a mountain, and for the first time, doubt whispered in his ear. He stood at the edge of the training ground, his small paws sinking slightly into the soft earth, staring up at the obstacle that stretched before him. The wooden bar sat suspended between 2 posts, and while it might have seemed modest to the larger dogs who trained here, to Max it appeared impossibly high, a challenge that belonged to another world entirely. The golden afternoon sun caught the dust particles floating around the jump, and somehow this made it seem even more daunting, as if the obstacle itself was glowing with an almost mocking luminescence. Behind him, he could hear the encouraging voice of his mentor, the wise old retriever whose kindness had seemed boundless just moments before. Now, however, even that warmth felt distant as Max focused entirely on the task ahead. His heart pounded in his chest, a rhythm that seemed to echo across the quiet meadow. The estate stretched out around him, peaceful and beautiful, with rolling fields dotted with wildflowers and ancient oak trees casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. It was a place designed for dreams, and yet here stood this single obstacle, representing everything that made his dream feel impossibly fragile. Max took a few steps backward, positioning himself for his approach. He had watched other dogs sail over jumps with such grace, their bodies arcing through the air as if they were born to fly. He had imagined himself doing the same, his small frame becoming an asset rather than a limitation, his heart and determination lifting him higher than any physical advantage could. But imagination and reality, he was beginning to understand, were two different landscapes entirely. He began to run, his legs working as hard as they could manage, pumping rapidly against the earth beneath him. The jump grew larger as he approached, and for a moment, Max felt a surge of hope. Perhaps he could do this. Perhaps his speed would compensate for his size. He gathered himself for the leap, every muscle in his compact body tensing with effort and intention. But as he launched himself upward, his paws simply did not reach high enough. He cleared the bottom portion of the jump, but his body made contact with the bar, sending it clattering to the ground with a hollow sound that seemed to echo across the entire estate. Max landed beyond the obstacle, slightly off balance, and turned to look at what he had not accomplished. The bar lay on the earth, displaced by his failure. He stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, feeling the weight of his inadequacy settle onto his small shoulders like a heavy blanket. The other dogs who trained here were larger, stronger, their bodies naturally suited to these challenges. What had he been thinking, believing that heart alone could overcome such fundamental physical limitations? His mentor approached slowly, and Max expected disappointment in those experienced eyes. Instead, he found only gentle understanding, and perhaps a glimpse of his own struggle reflected in the older dog's gaze. Words were spoken, words about persistence and growth, about how every champion had once stood where Max was standing now. The retriever's voice carried decades of wisdom, but Max heard it as if from very far away, filtered through his own disappointment and uncertainty. As the training session concluded and the other dogs made their way back toward the comfortable quarters on the estate, Max remained on the training ground. He watched the shadows grow longer, watched the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. The sky transformed gradually, blushing first in pale pinks and soft oranges, then deepening into richer ambers and rose hues that seemed to contain all the warmth and possibility of the entire day. The light painted the meadow in extraordinary colors, turning the grass into something almost ethereal, transforming the very landscape that had seemed so challenging just moments before into something hauntingly beautiful. Max sat in the fading light, his small body motionless, his eyes fixed on the western sky. His chest still heaved with exertion, but his breathing had begun to slow, to settle into something more peaceful. The doubt that had whispered in his ear when he first approached that jump had not disappeared entirely, but it had quieted somewhat, overtaken by a different feeling. It was not hope exactly, nor quite determination, but something more fragile and essential. Though he didn't clear the jump that day, Max refused to let disappointment anchor his spirit as he watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Sage taught Max something revolutionary, that the same size that made him feel small could make him swift, nimble, and nearly impossible to outmaneuver. The wise old collie sat beside the small terrier mix on the morning dew-covered grass, her silver-threaded coat shimmering as she gestured toward the sprawling obstacle course before them. The morning light cast long shadows across the training grounds, and the air carried the sweetness of honeysuckle from the hedgerows beyond. Max had arrived at dawn, his spirit still tender from yesterday's failed jump, but something in him had shifted during the night. Perhaps it was the kindness in Sage's eyes, or perhaps it was simply the recognition that he had nothing left to lose by trying a different approach. The elderly dog rose slowly and walked him toward the weaving poles, those tall wooden posts arranged in a precise line that seemed to stretch forever across the meadow. "Look at your body," Sage said, her voice like warm honey. "These legs of yours, so much closer to the ground, already know something about balance that taller dogs must learn." "Watch," the collie moved through the poles with practiced ease, but then she paused, inviting Max forward. As he approached the first pole, something shifted in his understanding. Rather than trying to leap and bound like the retrievers did, Max felt his center of gravity settle lower naturally. His small paws found the earth quickly between each post. The poles seemed less like obstacles and more like a conversation his body could have. "Feel the rhythm," Sage encouraged from the sidelines. "Not powers, little ones. Flow." Max moved through the weaving pattern, and for the first time, the poles didn't seem antagonistic. His compact frame allowed him to shift weight rapidly from side to side. Where larger dogs needed momentum and planning, Max could change direction almost instantaneously. His smaller surface area meant less wind resistance, less effort wasted on movements that didn't serve the course. He was discovering that his perceived limitation was actually a spectacular advantage in disguise. They spent the morning exploring other obstacles with this new philosophy. The tunnel, which had always made Max feel claustrophobic when he compared his experience to the grand way larger dogs moved through it, now became a perfect fit. His body moved through it with natural grace, no wasted space around him. The seesaw, previously intimidating because of the height he had to navigate, proved easier with his lighter weight distribution. The ground seemed closer when you were already small, and falling held less terror. By midday, they approached the jumping sequence. Sage didn't ask Max to attempt the regulation heights. Instead, she had the handlers lower the bars slightly, creating a course that was challenging without being impossible. Max warmed up with smaller obstacles, feeling the strength in his hindquarters building, understanding that his jumping technique didn't need to match the retriever's approach. His smaller frame created a different arc, a different rhythm. The sun climbed higher, warming the meadow until the grass seemed almost golden. Max found himself moving through each jump with increasing confidence, his body remembering that speed and precision could replace brute force. With each successful obstacle, his confidence grew like a seed, receiving exactly the right amount of sun and rain. As they circled back to the weaving poles for one final run, a small gathering had assembled at the edge of the training grounds. The skeptical retrievers, some of the larger breeds who had doubted Max's capacity to truly compete, had come to watch the afternoon session. Max could feel their gaze as he approached the poles, and for just a moment, old anxiety flickered. But then Sage touched her nose gently to his ear. "You're exactly where you need to be," she whispered. Max moved through the weaving pattern one final time, his body perfectly attuned to each shift and turn. His paws touched the earth with confident precision. He moved with an elegance that came not from size or power, but from understanding himself completely. The poles became a dance, and Max was suddenly aware he had learned the steps. For the first time, Max successfully navigated the weaving poles with such grace that even the skeptical retrievers watching from the sidelines offered genuine applause. There came a day when Max watched another young dog, nearly twice his size, soar effortlessly over the A-frame, and the question formed in his mind, why even try? The morning had started like so many others on the estate, with dewdrops glistening across the meadows and the promise of another training session ahead. But something felt different in the air, something heavy that Max couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the accumulation of small frustrations, or perhaps it was the natural rhythm of doubt that visits even the most determined hearts. He stood at the edge of the practice field, watching a Labrador named Chester approach the wooden A-frame with casual confidence. Chester's broad shoulders carried him forward with such ease, his powerful hind legs propelling him upward in one fluid motion that barely seemed to require effort. He cleared the obstacle as though it were nothing more than a gentle slope, landing smoothly on the other side without a single misstep. Max felt something crack inside his chest, a hairline fracture in the resolve that had sustained him through weeks of training. His own legs suddenly seemed impossibly short, his frame impossibly compact. How could he ever hope to match that kind of natural prowess? The other dogs on the estate possessed such obvious advantages, as though the universe had distributed its gifts with a careless hand, giving generously to some while offering Max only determination, which now felt terribly insufficient. He decided to attempt the A-frame anyway, driven by something between obligation and hopeless ambition. His paws pushed off the ground with familiar effort, his muscles straining in ways that had become routine. But today, the timing felt wrong. He miscalculated the angle of his approach, and his back legs caught on the descending slope. His body tumbled sideways, landing hard on his shoulder in the grass below. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, and for a moment he simply lay there, stunned and aching. A few of the other dogs turned to look, their expressions shifting between sympathy and a kind of knowing sadness. He could almost hear their thoughts, poor little Max, trying so hard at something that simply wasn't meant for him. The humiliation burned hotter than the physical pain in his shoulder. He picked himself up slowly, shaking the dust from his coat with as much dignity as he could muster. The afternoon stretched before him like an endless path of similar disappointments. He wandered away from the training grounds, away from the watchful eyes of the other animals, seeking the solitude of the far meadow where the grass grew tall and wild. There, beneath an ancient oak tree, Max finally allowed himself to sit heavily in the cool grass. His breathing came in jagged pulls, both from exertion and from the emotional exhaustion that now consumed him. He thought about Chester and the Goldens and the Border Collies, all of them seemingly built for success in ways he simply wasn't. He thought about quitting entirely, about accepting some role on the estate that didn't require him to measure himself against dogs who had been given so much more. The rationalization was almost comforting. He could stop trying. He could spare himself these repeated failures, these moments of public inadequacy. He could find peace in acceptance, in lowering his expectations to match his actual capabilities. No more bruises. No more doubts, no more reaching for something just beyond his grasp. But as he sat in the lengthening shadows, feeling the breeze move through the grass around him, something shifted in his awareness. He thought back to the weaving poles, to that moment of unexpected grace just the day before. That accomplishment had seemed impossible until it wasn't. His body had learned, adapted, and ultimately succeeded through nothing more than persistent effort, day after day. The thought of walking away from that path, of surrendering to the easier narrative of his own limitations, suddenly felt unbearable. Not because he was certain of victory, but because the alternative was a kind of quiet defeat he couldn't accept. But as he sat in the cool grass, breathing heavily, Max realized that quitting was far easier than persisting, and he had never been one to choose the easy path. Max's body ached in ways he didn't know were possible, but beneath the soreness grew something stronger, unshakable determination. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds as he stretched his golden fur, each movement a quiet reminder of yesterday's falls and tumbles. His muscles protested with every bend and extension, yet he welcomed the sensation. Pain, he had come to understand, was simply evidence that he was pushing beyond what he thought himself capable of achieving. The week ahead stretched before him like an endless ribbon of possibility. Other dogs from the estate had begun to notice his relentless schedule, his commitment to the course. Some offered encouragement with gentle nods as they passed. Others, particularly the larger breeds who had always dominated the championships, watched with expressions that mingled curiosity and something that might have been respect. Max paid them little mind. His focus had narrowed to a single point, becoming the best version of himself that he could possibly be. Today's lesson would focus on the weave poles, those slender columns that demanded both speed and precision. For a dog of Max's stature, threading between them required an almost balletic grace, a fluidity of movement that larger competitors simply could not achieve. His trainer, an elderly golden retriever named Chester, who had competed decades ago, positioned himself at the starting line with genuine interest in his small protege's progress. Max exploded forward at Chester's command, his paws barely touching the ground as he launched himself toward the first pole. The approach was clean, his angle perfect. He threaded through the first three with increasing confidence, his body finding the rhythm, the dance of the course. But as he approached the fourth pole, his left rear paw caught slightly on the ground. The stumble was minimal, barely noticeable to an untrained eye, but it cost him crucial momentum. He recovered quickly, continuing through the remaining poles, but he knew it wasn't his best effort. Back at the start, Chester simply nodded. There were no elaborate instructions, no criticism. The old dog understood that sometimes the teacher's silence spoke louder than any words could. Max turned around immediately and ran the sequence again. This time, his concentration was absolute. Every muscle engaged with purpose, every paw strike deliberate. He moved through the poles like water finding its path, smooth and inevitable. When he finished, Chester's tail wagged with genuine approval. But Max was not satisfied with merely good. He ran it again and again as the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky. His breathing grew heavier, his movements sometimes less crisp than before, yet something within him refused to stop. This was the difference between wanting something and being willing to sacrifice for it. Anyone could want victory, but to train when exhaustion pulled at every fiber, to push forward when every instinct screamed for rest, that was the true measure of character. As evening descended and the other dogs retreated to their comfortable resting spots, Max remained on the grounds. The temperature had dropped slightly, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the meadows. Under Chester's watchful but distant eye, Max practiced the jump sequence, the tunnel run, and the weave poles one final time. His form had deteriorated somewhat with fatigue, but his heart remained completely engaged. The stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, tiny points of light that seemed to multiply as night deepened. Max could feel the weight of the day settling into his bones, could sense how close he was to complete exhaustion. Yet something magical happened in those final hours of training. As his body grew tired, his mind became clearer. The obstacles transformed from challenges to be conquered into partners in his journey. The course no longer felt like something opposing him, but rather something inviting him to become more than he believed possible. Chester watched from the pavilion, seeing in this small golden dog something rare and precious, the understanding that true victory was not about defeating others, but about becoming the best possible version of oneself. The training grounds were silent except for the soft sounds of Max's dedication, the gentle patter of paws on earth, the measured breathing of an athlete lost in purpose. Night after night under the stars, Max trained until his small muscles burned and his paws were sore, but his spirit grew lighter with each sunset. Echo was as quick as lightning and just as unpredictable, and from the moment they met, Max knew he had found a partner who spoke his language. The border collie came bounding around the corner of the training grounds one golden afternoon, her black and white coat gleaming in the sunlight, her eyes sharp and intelligent as they fixed upon the small golden retriever standing alone by the practice jumps. She skidded to a halt, her paws kicking up little clouds of dust, and tilted her head with unmistakable curiosity. Max had been practicing his approach to the lowest jump for what felt like hours, repeating the same motions, perfecting his technique. His muscles were still sore from the nights of training under the stars, but he pressed on, determined to prove that heart could compensate for lack of height. When Echo appeared, he felt something shift within him, a sudden awareness that the journey he had been taking alone might be about to change. Echo introduced herself with characteristic directness, asking why such a small dog was working with such serious intensity. Max could have felt self-conscious, could have wondered if she was mocking him, but something in her tone told him she was genuinely interested. He explained his dreams of competing in the championship, of showing everyone that size was merely a number, that spirit and determination mattered far more than physical measurements. To his surprise and delight, Echo did not laugh or dismiss his ambitions. Instead, she sat beside him and began to talk about strategy. She explained that her natural speed meant nothing without precision, that she had learned through countless runs that the fastest path between 2 points was not always a straight line. In agility, she said, understanding the flow of the course, anticipating the turns, reading the terrain, these things mattered as much as raw velocity. Together, they began to work. Max would attempt the jumps while Echo observed, calling out observations in her quick, clipped way of speaking. She noticed how he approached each obstacle, how he gathered himself before each leap, where his timing could be sharper. In return, Max watched how Echo moved with liquid grace, how she seemed to float across the ground, and he began to understand that speed without control was merely chaos. Days passed in this wonderful partnership. They would meet at dawn when the meadows were still misty with moisture, when the world felt like it belonged only to them. Echo would race ahead, her small size belying her power, showing Max different paths through the complex courses that had been set up on the estate. She taught him that a smaller dog could use agility differently, could take tighter corners, could slip through spaces where larger competitors might struggle. Max, for his part, taught Echo something equally valuable. He taught her patience. His methodical approach, born from his smaller stature and the extra effort each movement required, helped Echo understand that sometimes slowing down to focus on precision could create a far greater advantage than simply running faster. She began to move with more intention, each leap calculated and controlled. The other dogs on the estate began to notice the unlikely pair. The sight of the little golden retriever and the swift border collie became familiar and admired. They moved together like a well-choreographed dance, their different styles somehow complementing each other perfectly. Max felt his confidence blooming like the flowers that dotted the meadows around them. One particularly brilliant afternoon, as the sun hung low and painted everything golden, they ran the complete championship course together. Max navigated each obstacle with newfound confidence, his small size no longer feeling like a limitation, but like a unique advantage. Echo stayed beside him, not racing ahead but matching his pace, their partnership evident in every synchronized movement. When they crossed the finish line, both breathing heavily but exhilarated, Max understood something profound. He was no longer the small dog training alone under the stars, wondering if he could ever truly compete. He was part of something larger, something beautiful. As they raced through the fields together, Max felt like he had found not just a friend, but a reflection of his own fierce spirit. The morning was crisp and clear, and something felt different in the way the wind moved through Max's golden fur. He stood at the edge of the training grounds, his paws sinking slightly into the dewy grass as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The A-frame loomed before him, that wooden structure that had become both his greatest teacher and his most persistent challenge. Today felt different, though. Today carried a quality he couldn't quite name, something that settled in his chest like warmth spreading through cool water. His friend from yesterday's meadow run appeared beside him, a lean collie with eyes that sparkled with encouragement. They had spent the evening talking beneath the stars, sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. The collie had told Max about the time she nearly gave up, about the moment she realized that courage wasn't about being unafraid, but about moving forward despite the fear. Max had listened to every word, letting them nestle into the quiet corners of his heart where doubt had been building. Coach Davies stood at the far end of the practice field, his weathered face calm and patient. He had seen countless dogs train over the years, but he recognized something in Max's stance this morning. There was a stillness there, a focus that hadn't been present before. The older dogs watching from the shade of the great oak tree seemed to sense it too, settling in as if they knew something momentous was about to unfold. Max took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. He thought about all the times he had approached this jump with desperation, throwing his whole body at it as if sheer determination could compensate for his smaller frame. He thought about the falls, the moments when his paws didn't quite catch, when gravity won its brief battle. But he also thought about yesterday, about racing through fields, about laughter and friendship and the feeling of being truly understood. He began his run, feeling the grass give way beneath his paws with each stride. His breathing was steady, his mind quiet. He wasn't thinking about technique or angles or the height of the obstacle. Instead, he was thinking about the feeling of flight, about trust, about the thousands of tiny decisions his body made when he let go of worry and simply moved. The A-frame grew larger as he approached, and instead of tension, Max felt a strange peace settle over him. His muscles knew what to do. His instincts had been preparing for this moment through every practice session, every fall, every moment of getting back up. He gathered his strength not with strain, but with purpose. At the exact right moment, Max pushed off from the ground, and for a fraction of a second that felt suspended in time, he rose. His body arced upward with perfect form, his smaller size suddenly an advantage, his lighter frame allowing for a grace that heavier dogs simply couldn't achieve. He cleared the peak of the A-frame with space to spare, and the landing was solid, confident, each paw finding purchase with precision. His back legs finished their journey over the jump, and he touched down on the opposite side with a grace that surprised even himself. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing, realizing what had just happened. The jump that had haunted his dreams, that had seemed like an impossible barrier, had become something he could simply do. The sidelines erupted. The other dogs were barking in celebration. Coach Davies was smiling his rare, genuine smile, and even the grand old dogs beneath the oak tree were nodding their approval. Max's collie friend was dancing with joy, spinning in circles as she barked her happiness into the golden morning. But through all the external celebration, Max heard something else. Beneath the cheers and the barks and the sounds of the awakening countryside, he heard the quiet, steady voice of his own heart. It was singing, pure and true, repeating words that he had almost forgotten to believe. I did it. As he landed gracefully on the other side, Max heard cheers from the sidelines, but louder than any cheers was the quiet voice of his own heart singing, I did it. In the golden hour before sunset, Sage began to tell Max about champions from every generation, every size, and every circumstance. The old golden retriever settled onto a soft patch of grass beneath the ancient oak tree, and Max curled up beside him, his small golden body tucked against the warmth of his mentor's side. The meadow grew quieter as evening approached, and the light took on that particular quality that made everything seem timeless and sacred. Sage's voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of decades of wisdom and love. There was once a Chihuahua named Pip, Sage began, whose entire body could fit in the palm of a human hand. Pip weighed barely 3 pounds, yet she possessed a heart the size of the entire estate. When she first arrived at the championships, other dogs laughed. How could something so small possibly navigate the obstacles designed for creatures twice her size? But Pip had something that could not be measured in pounds or inches. She had an unshakable belief in her own worth. Sage paused, letting the evening breeze carry his words across the meadow. Pip approached each jump with the same fierce determination that larger dogs brought to their runs. She would gather herself, spring upward with every ounce of her being, and clear those bars with inches to spare. The crowd would fall silent in awe. Within 3 seasons, she had won the championship 4 times. Judges and spectators alike wept at the beauty of her determination. Size, Sage explained gently, is only a number. Spirit is everything. Then there was Thorn, continued the old dog, his voice growing even softer. Thorn was a terrier who lost his front left leg in an accident when he was still young. Many thought his championship days were behind him. Thorn himself struggled with despair in those early months. But gradually, something shifted within him. He realized that what he had lost in limbs, he could gain in cleverness. He learned to navigate the course differently, to use his 3 remaining legs with such perfect coordination that he seemed to dance through the obstacles rather than simply overcome them. Thorn never won the championship, Sage said thoughtfully, but his 5th-place finish in his first season back became legendary. Dogs and humans alike lined the course to witness his run. Every jump, every weave, every moment of his performance was a love letter to the possibility of transformation. He taught everyone who watched him that limitation is not the same as failure. Sometimes what appears to be an ending is actually a magnificent beginning. Sage turned to look at Max directly then, his amber eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Do you know what all these champions had in common, Max? They did not begin their journeys believing they would win. They began their journeys simply believing they could try. They showed up. They committed to the efforts. They listened to their hearts instead of the doubts that whispered around them. The old dog's voice grew warm and tender. You demonstrated that very thing today when you landed on the other side of that jump. You had just heard your own heart sing with the truth of your achievement. That feeling, Max, that inner knowing of your own capability, is more valuable than any ribbon or trophy. That is what separates a true champion from someone who simply has physical advantages. As darkness began to gather at the edges of the meadow, lights from the distant estate house twinkled like earthbound stars. Sage continued to speak of other champions too, each story more inspiring than the last. A German shepherd who overcame severe anxiety, a tiny mixed breed who had been abandoned and found purpose in the sport, a senior dog who competed for the first time at an age when most thought their running days were done. Each story was told with such tenderness and reverence that the very air around them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Max felt something expanding within his small chest, something warm and golden, something that felt like hope mixed with determination. The stories were not just about winning. They were about the beautiful, unbreakable human and animal spirit that refuses to be limited by circumstances. Max listened with his whole heart, and each story became another brick in the foundation of his belief that anything was possible. The registration scroll lay before Max, waiting for his paw print, and with it came the weight of real stakes and genuine opportunity. The parchment was aged and official, creased at the corners from seasons of use, bearing the golden seal of the Regional Agility Commission. Max's whiskers trembled slightly as he stared at the form, each word seeming to pulse with consequence. This was no longer theoretical, no longer the comfortable realm of training alongside his friends in the meadows. This was the threshold between dreaming and doing. The morning had arrived cool and misty, the kind of day when the countryside estate seemed to exist between worlds. Max had woken early, his small heart already racing before his eyes even opened. He'd padded across the damp grass toward the administrative pavilion, a structure of white timber and flowing curtains that served as the nerve center of all official championship matters. Inside, Keeper Edmund sat at his weathered desk, the registration scroll spread before him like an invitation to transformation. Edmund was an elderly terrier whose own competitive days had long passed, but his eyes still gleamed with the memory of triumph. He'd watched Max train over these past weeks, had observed the determination in the young golden retriever's movements, the fire in his spirit that seemed to burn brighter than any physical advantage could provide. When Max approached, Edmund smiled with the warmth of someone who understood what courage truly meant. "You're certain about this?" Edmund asked, his voice gentle but probing. The question wasn't meant to discourage, but to ensure Max understood the gravity of his choice. The regional trials would draw the finest agility competitors from 5 counties. These were seasoned athletes, many with years of experience, with bodies honed by countless competitions. Max was not yet 2 years old, still growing into his frame, still learning the deeper languages of his own body. Max nodded, though doubt coiled like smoke through his chest. He thought of all the stories shared by the elder dogs, tales of glory and heartbreak, of championships won through sheer determination when the odds seemed impossible. He remembered the greyhound who'd overcome a previous injury to claim victory, the corgi whose diminutive size had become her greatest asset through clever strategy and unparalleled speed. These weren't just stories anymore. They were proof that the spirit could overcome what logic suggested was insurmountable. The trials begin in 3 weeks, Edmund continued, readying his pen. The course design changes each year. It's meant to test not just speed and agility, but adaptability and heart. You'll be in the youth division, competing against dogs from 18 months to 3 years old. Some will tower over you. Some will have competed in trials before. Max's paws felt small against the cool floor. 3 weeks, 21 days to refine everything he'd learned, to strengthen not just his muscles, but his conviction. It seemed simultaneously endless and impossibly brief. The registration fee must be paid, Edmund said, his tone shifting to practical matters. Your mentor has already arranged it. There's housing provided near the trial grounds if you need it. And Max, there's one more thing. Edmund leaned forward, his aged eyes holding Max's gaze with surprising intensity. Every competitor who steps onto that course will have moments of doubt. Fear is not the opposite of courage. Fear is the companion of anyone brave enough to try. You understand, Max did understand, in the way that young creatures with old souls sometimes do. He understood that courage wasn't the absence of terror, but the decision to move forward despite it. Every great competitor he'd admired had felt this same trembling uncertainty. The difference was that they'd continued anyway. Edmund positioned the parchment before him and indicated where Max's mark should go. This was the formal commitment, the moment where possibility became promise. As he stared at that blank space waiting for his paw print, Max felt the full weight of what came next. The training would intensify. The pressure would mount. There would be moments of exhaustion and doubt that made today's nervousness seem quaint. He closed his eyes briefly, gathering the scattered pieces of his courage into something resembling readiness. He thought of those stories once more, of the dreams he'd held close through endless practice sessions. As he pressed his tiny paw against the parchment, Max felt both terror and exhilaration course through his small body. The days grew shorter as autumn painted the training grounds in shades of gold and crimson, and Max's dedication became even more fierce and focused. Each morning before the sun crested the distant hills, the small golden retriever was already stretching his lean muscles, preparing his body and mind for the challenges that lay ahead. Echo, his constant companion and mentor, watched with quiet pride as the little dog moved through his routines with a determination that seemed to grow with each passing week. The training grounds had become Max's sanctuary, a place where the earth beneath his paws felt like possibility itself. The obstacle course that once seemed impossibly tall now felt like a series of puzzles waiting to be solved rather than barriers meant to defeat him. He had memorized every inch of it, the angle of each jump, the distance between each hurdle, the way the ground shifted beneath the weave poles. His body had learned through countless repetitions, but more importantly, his mind had transformed the fear into fuel. Echo introduced him to a technique that would prove invaluable in the coming days: visualization. They would sit together in the late afternoon, the golden light filtering through the trees, and Echo would guide Max through imagining perfect runs. In these quiet moments, Max would close his eyes and feel himself moving flawlessly through each obstacle, his timing impeccable, his confidence unshakable. The older dog's voice became like a beacon, painting pictures of success in Max's imagination until the boundary between dream and reality began to blur in the most beautiful way. But visualization alone was not enough. Max also developed what Echo called the inner dialogue, the quiet conversation a competitor must maintain with themselves. Whenever doubt crept in, whenever Max felt the weight of his smaller frame, he would repeat the words that had become his personal mantra. I am swift. I am clever. I am brave. These simple declarations grew stronger with each repetition, embedding themselves into the very core of who Max was becoming. The other dogs at the estate noticed the transformation happening before their eyes. Max carried himself differently now, with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with conviction. When the larger breeds would gather by the fence, sometimes making comments about the improbability of a golden retriever like Max competing in the trials, he would simply nod and continue his training. Their doubt no longer penetrated his shield of determination. As the final weeks approached, Echo intensified the training in subtle but meaningful ways. They would practice during different times of day, when the light was harsh or soft, when Max was fresh or tired. They ran the course in rain and sunshine, teaching Max's body to adapt to any conditions the trials might present. Every session built upon the last, creating layers of muscle memory and confidence that would carry him through even the most demanding moments. The evenings became sacred time. Max and Echo would walk the perimeter of the training grounds together, moving slowly through the cooling air. These walks were as much about reflection as they were about physical preparation. Echo shared stories of other competitors who had triumphed against the odds, not because they were the biggest or the strongest, but because they refused to accept that their dreams were too large for their bodies to contain. Max listened to every word, absorbing not just the stories, but the philosophy beneath them. He began to understand that the trials were not truly about jumping higher or running faster than anyone else. They were about discovering what lived within himself, about proving that heart and determination and relentless dedication could write a different kind of story than anyone might have predicted. The night before the trials, Max could barely sleep, his entire being thrummed with anticipation and nervous energy. He rose in the darkness and stepped outside, looking up at the stars scattered across the black canvas of sky. He thought of every sunrise he had trained through, every obstacle he had conquered, every moment of doubt he had transformed into resolve. Tomorrow would be the culmination of everything. Every sunset was a promise to himself, and every sunrise brought him closer to the moment that would define everything he had worked toward. Max's eyes opened before dawn on the day that would change his life forever, his entire body vibrating with nervous energy. The sky outside his bedroom window was still painted in shades of indigo and violet, that tender space between night and morning when the world held its breath. He lay on his soft bedding, his small golden fur catching the faintest hint of moonlight still lingering in the air, and felt his heart racing like he had already run 1,000 miles. For months, he had prepared for this moment. Every morning started with exercises, every afternoon brought training sessions, and every evening concluded with visualization and rest. His family had supported him through it all, and now the regional trials stood before him like a mountain he must climb. The anxiety wrapped around his chest like a gentle but insistent paw, squeezing with the weight of expectation and hope intertwined. He rose from his bed and padded quietly through the house, his small nails clicking softly against the wooden floors. The estate was still sleeping, but Max felt too alive, too awake to remain still. He made his way to the kitchen and found his mother already stirring, her larger frame moving with practiced ease as she prepared his breakfast. She looked up and smiled, her brown eyes warm with understanding. "You're up early," she said softly, placing his bowl on the floor with care. It contained everything he would need for energy and focus: fresh eggs, lean chicken, and a mix of wholesome grains. "How are you feeling?" Max sat before the bowl but did not immediately eat. Scared, he admitted, his voice small in the quiet kitchen. "There are so many bigger dogs competing. Dogs with longer legs and broader chests. What if I'm not fast enough? What if I can't navigate the course?" His mother settled beside him, her presence immediately soothing. "Max, you have spent every day proving that size is not the measure of a heart. You have trained harder than most dogs twice your size. You know every obstacle on that course better than any competitor. Your spirit, your determination, your will to succeed, these are what matter." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, and Max began to eat. The food nourished not just his body, but something deeper, something that needed fortification before the challenge ahead. As he finished, his father appeared in the doorway, having heard the voices, and embraced him with a gentle nuzzle. "We will be watching," his father said. "Your entire family will be there. Your aunts and uncles, your cousins, everyone who has watched you grow from a tiny pup into the determined young dog standing before us now." Throughout the morning, Max moved through his preparations with intentional calm. He bathed in cool water that helped settle his nerves, his golden coat gleaming like spun sunshine. He practiced his breathing exercises as his trainer had taught him, feeling the anxiety gradually transform into focused energy. Around the estate, other dogs were arriving, other families gathering, and the air thrummed with the electricity of competition and camaraderie both. His best friend, a spirited terrier named Pip, found him near the training grounds and bounced excitedly. "Are you ready?" Pip asked, his natural enthusiasm infectious. "This is it, Max. This is what you've been waiting for. I've seen you train, and I know you can do this." Hearing the confidence in his friend's voice steadied something within Max. He was not alone in this. He had everyone behind him: his family, his friends, his trainer who believed in his potential, and the entire community that had watched him grow stronger with each passing season. The fear did not disappear entirely, but it transformed into something more useful: determination mixed with respect for the challenge before him. As the sun began to rise in earnest, painting the meadows in golden light, Max made his way to the training grounds with his family. Other competitors were gathering, checking the course, warming their muscles. Max felt small among them, yes, but also somehow larger than he had ever felt before. As he stretched his small legs and looked toward the training grounds glowing with morning light, Max took a deep breath and whispered, "This is my moment." The roar of the crowd seemed to fade into a single, clear silence as Max took his position at the starting line, his small body coiled like a spring. Around him stretched the vast arena, a carefully crafted landscape of obstacles that had seemed so manageable in practice, but now loomed with a kind of magnificent grandeur. The sun hung high and warm overhead, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He could feel the weight of countless eyes upon him: judges in their elevated stands, spectators clustered along the barriers, and his companions from the estate scattered throughout the crowd, their voices a distant hum beneath the thudding of his own heartbeat. Max's breath came steady and measured. He had trained for this moment through countless mornings when the grass still held the freshness of dawn. His paws, small but swift, had crossed this very course 100 times in practice. Yet this felt entirely different. This was real. This was the championship that every dog at the estate had dreamed of, where legends were made and spirits were tested not by size, but by something deeper, by courage and determination and an unwavering belief in oneself. The signal came. A single clear bell tone cut through the air, and Max exploded forward with all the power his compact frame could muster. His muscles sang with the exertion, each fiber working in perfect harmony with the next. The first hurdle approached, and he gathered himself, launching upward and clearing it with inches to spare. The crowd gasped, perhaps surprised, perhaps amazed. He didn't have time to wonder which. Momentum carried him forward into the weaving poles, and here his smaller stature became an advantage. He moved through them like water, each turn sharp and precise, his tail streaming behind him like a banner. The tunnel loomed ahead, dark and mysterious. Max didn't hesitate. He dove into its depths, feeling the fabric brush against his fur as he raced through the confined space. The sounds of the world became muffled, distant, and for a moment it was only him and the path forward. When he emerged into the sunlight again, the crowd's energy seemed to surge. He was building momentum, stringing together flawless transitions that spoke of countless hours spent perfecting his craft. The tire jump came next, and Max approached it with surgical precision. He angled his approach perfectly, using his speed and agility to slip through the center with grace. His smaller weight meant less impact, less effort required, and he was already thinking 3 obstacles ahead. His mind moved faster than his body, anticipating each turn, each climb, each challenge before it arrived. The A-frame loomed, its steep angles a test of balance and nerve. Max scrambled up the ascending side, his nails finding purchase on the painted surface, and then transitioned to the descent with perfect control. His hindquarters never wavered. The confidence he felt wasn't arrogance. It was earned through repetition, through failure and learning and trying again. It was the confidence that came from knowing you'd prepared as thoroughly as any champion ever could. The final stretch unwound before him. A series of jumps in quick succession required timing and rhythm. Max found his flow, his breathing synchronized with his movements, each leap carrying him closer to something he'd only dared to dream about. The last obstacle came and went. There was nothing left but the straightaway to the finish line, nothing but clear ground and the promise of completion. His legs pumped beneath him, eating up the distance with remarkable speed for his size. The noise around him began to return gradually, building like a wave about to break. He could hear voices now, shouting encouragement, expressing wonder. He could feel the vibration of the crowd's excitement through the very ground beneath his paws. As he crossed the finish line, the noise erupted again, thunderous and joyful, and Max realized he had done something that no one had expected. He had excelled. When the judge called Max's name as one of the finalists for nationals, the sound seemed to echo across the entire training grounds. The golden retriever stood frozen for a moment, his small frame trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming rush of validation coursing through his body. Around him, the crowd erupted into cheers that seemed to lift him right off his paws. Third place. He had finished third in the regional trials. Third. The words still didn't feel quite real as he made his way through the throng of well-wishers toward the podium. Dogs of every size and breed reached out their paws or nuzzled him gently as he passed. The German shepherd, who had seemed so intimidating weeks ago, now bowed his head respectfully. The elegant Afghan hound smiled warmly. Even the massive Great Dane, who had breezed through every obstacle like they were nothing, patted Max's shoulder with genuine admiration. The judge, an elderly collie with silver streaking his muzzle, handed Max a ribbon the color of polished bronze. When Max looked down at it, the afternoon sun caught the metallic sheen, and for a moment he could hardly breathe. This wasn't just a ribbon. It was proof. It was real. Behind the podium, Max could see his family gathered together. His mother's eyes glistened with tears of pride. His siblings wore expressions of pure joy, no longer tinged with the doubt that had shadowed their faces at the beginning of this journey. And there, standing slightly apart from the group, was Coach Bentley, the old border collie who had believed in him from the start. Their eyes met, and the coach gave a slow, knowing nod. He had always known this was possible. As Max descended from the podium, a reporter approached with her microphone. She was a perky spaniel with an eager expression. "Max, how does it feel to have qualified for the nationals?" she asked, her eyes bright with genuine curiosity. Max took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "It feels like a dream," he said softly. "Not because I've always dreamed big, but because I've worked so hard with Coach Bentley and my family. We didn't focus on being the fastest or the biggest. We focused on being the best version of myself. That's what got me here." The reporter's smile grew wider. "And what's next for you?" "The nationals," Max said, and this time there was no uncertainty in his voice. "But more than that, I want to keep proving that heart matters. That dedication matters. That size doesn't determine destiny." The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, painting the training grounds in shades of amber and rose. The other competitors gathered around Max throughout the evening, congratulating him genuinely. The competitive spirit that had driven them all remained, but it was tempered with respect and camaraderie. They had all pushed each other to be better. That night, back at the family home, they celebrated quietly. His mother prepared his favorite meal. His siblings retold the highlights of the competition, their voices animated and joyful. But Max found himself stepping outside alone onto the sprawling meadow, the bronze ribbon still hanging from his collar. He looked up at the emerging stars, their light steady and eternal. He thought about the puppy he had been, the one who was told his size was a limitation. He thought about every jump, every weave, every obstacle he had practiced until his paws ached. He thought about Coach Bentley's patient guidance and his family's unwavering support. 3 months ago, he never would have believed this moment was possible. A small dog qualifying for nationals. It seemed like the stuff of fantasy. But here he stood, with solid evidence of his achievement hanging from his neck. The meadow seemed to stretch endlessly before him, bathed in starlight. The gentle night breeze ruffled his golden fur. Everything felt exactly right, exactly perfect, exactly as it should be. For the first time, Max truly believed that his dream, the dream that had seemed so impossibly large for such a small puppy, was actually within his reach. The national championships were the pinnacle, the dream upon the dream, a stage so grand that Max had barely allowed himself to imagine it. For so long, the golden retriever had kept his gaze fixed firmly on the meadows of his beloved countryside estate, content to master each obstacle one at a time. But now, as autumn painted the world in shades of amber and crimson, whispers of the national stage began to echo through the training grounds, and Max found himself caught between the comfort of the familiar and the thrilling pull of something greater. The news arrived on a crisp morning, when Coach Bernard gathered the entire community beneath the ancient oak tree that had witnessed countless dreams take flight. His weathered voice carried across the assembled dogs with the weight of tradition and possibility. The nationals, he explained, would bring together the finest competitors from every region across the country. Thousands upon thousands of spectators would fill the grandstands. Television cameras would broadcast the events to homes far and wide. It was the pinnacle of everything they trained for, the ultimate celebration of agility, heart, and determination. Max listened, his small frame trembling slightly as the enormity of it all settled upon him. He thought of the regional trials he had recently completed, how his legs had burned with effort as he navigated the weave poles, how his heart had soared when he cleared jumps that once seemed impossibly tall. He remembered the roar of the crowd at those regional events, the way their cheers had lifted him forward through every course. But a national championship felt like something belonging to a different universe entirely, one reserved for the largest, strongest, most naturally gifted competitors. Yet as Max looked around at the gathered dogs, he noticed something unexpected. Many of them were watching him. The Irish setter with her flowing coat, the border collie with his keen, intelligent eyes, the German shepherd whose muscular frame seemed carved from stone itself. They were all looking at him with expressions of quiet respect. In their gazes, Max saw something that shifted something fundamental within his understanding of what was possible. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the training grounds in shades of gold and purple, Max wandered to his favorite corner of the estate. His legs ached pleasantly from the day's work, his heart full of a strange mixture of fear and excitement. He thought about his journey from that small puppy who could barely clear the lowest jumps to this moment, standing on the threshold of the greatest challenge of his life. Every obstacle he had overcome, every doubt he had conquered, every moment he had chosen to try instead of retreat, it had all been building towards something. Coach Bernard found him there, settling down beside the small golden dog with a gentleness that came from years of understanding the hearts of competitors. The old coach didn't speak immediately. Instead, he simply sat, watching the last light fade from the sky alongside his smallest, bravest student. When words finally came, they were soft but certain. Bernard spoke of the Nationals not as an impossible mountain to climb, but as the next natural step in a journey that had always been meant to happen. He reminded Max that size had never been the measure of greatness in this community. Heart was, determination was, the willingness to face fear and move forward anyway. As the stars began to emerge in the deepening darkness, Max felt something crystallize within him. He thought of all those mornings when his muscles were sore, all those afternoons when he questioned whether he belonged on the same course as larger dogs. He thought of his friends who had cheered him on, who had believed in him even when he struggled to believe in himself. The path to the Nationals would demand everything he had. It would require training harder than ever before, facing competitors who seemed born for this sport in ways he never would be. It would test not just his body, but his spirit. But now, with the regional trials behind him, Max understood that the real journey was just beginning. In the nights leading up to Nationals, Max found himself questioning everything he had accomplished, wondering if it was all just luck and circumstance. He would lie in his cozy corner of the barn where he slept, watching the moonlight stream through the wooden beams overhead, and feel a creeping sense of unease settle into his chest like fog rolling across the meadows. The regional trials felt distant now, their victories somehow smaller than they had seemed just weeks before. What if those other dogs had simply been slower that day? What if the weather conditions had favored him by chance? What if he truly was not ready for the national stage, where the most exceptional competitors from across the entire country would gather? Max's paws would twitch with restless anxiety as these thoughts consumed him. During training sessions with his mentor Sage, a wise older collie whose silver-flecked coat shimmered in the afternoon sun, Max found himself making small mistakes he had long since mastered. His jumps lacked their usual precision. His turns felt hesitant and calculated rather than flowing and natural. The other dogs in the estate's close-knit community noticed too, though they said nothing. They simply offered encouraging nods and gentle barks of support as Max worked through obstacle after obstacle. The sprawling meadows of the countryside estate had always felt like sanctuary to him, but now they seemed to highlight his anxieties. Max would wander alone through the tall grass in the early mornings, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, and feel the weight of expectation pressing down on his small frame. He was a mixed breed in a competition dominated by pedigrees, with generations of training and natural athletic advantage. The fact that he had made it this far suddenly seemed impossible rather than inspiring. One afternoon, as clouds gathered above the training grounds and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the fields, Max found himself sitting beneath the old oak tree that stood at the edge of the estate. His usual energy had drained away, replaced by a hollow feeling that even treats could not soothe. He stared at the agility course visible in the distance, the jumps and weaves and tunnels that had become his whole world, and wondered if he had been foolish to dream this dream at all. That was when Sage found him, her steady presence materializing beside the ancient tree like a comforting shadow. The older dog did not speak immediately. She simply settled down beside Max, her breathing calm and measured, and together they watched the clouds drift slowly across the vast sky. The silence between them was not empty but full, the kind that only happens between those who truly understand one another. After several minutes, Sage turned her head to look at Max with eyes that held the warmth of countless sunsets. She told him that doubt was a companion that visited every competitor worth knowing, that it came from caring deeply about something, from understanding the magnitude of what lay ahead. She explained that the strongest athletes were not those who never questioned themselves, but those who questioned themselves and persisted anyway. The national competition would indeed be fierce, she said, but Max's spirit had never been about matching others physically. It had always been about refusing to be limited by what others expected. Max listened to her words as the afternoon light shifted around them, feeling something slowly settle within his chest. Sage reminded him of the moment he had first arrived at the estate, small and uncertain, and how he had transformed not through any sudden gift, but through showing up each day despite his doubts. That same quality, she assured him, was what would carry him through nationals. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in deeper shades of gold and crimson, Max felt a subtle shift in his heart. The doubts did not disappear entirely. They lingered at the edges of his consciousness, whispers of uncertainty that would likely return during sleepless nights. But they no longer felt like absolute truths. They felt like voices to acknowledge and move through rather than obstacles to surrender to. But then he would remember Sage's words. Doubt was not the absence of courage, but rather courage persisting despite the presence of fear. The journey to nationals took Max farther from home than he had ever traveled, and with each mile, his heart beat a little faster with anticipation. The golden retriever rested his chin against the car window, watching the landscape transform beneath the endless sky. Rolling hills gave way to distant mountains, forests stretched across the horizon like ancient sentinels, and the roads grew broader and busier as civilization assembled itself in greater density around them. His family sat around him in comfortable silence. His human companion Sarah traced lazy patterns on his fur, her touch grounding him in the present moment even as his mind raced forward toward what awaited. Her parents sat in front, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing quiet conversation about the championship venue they'd only ever seen in photographs. There was a reverence in their voices, a hushed excitement that made everything feel sacred somehow. Max thought about Sage often during those long hours on the road. The wise old border collie had taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but rather its persistence despite trembling legs and uncertain futures. Max understood this now in a way he never had before. He was afraid, and his stomach churned with it. But beneath the fear ran something deeper, something that had grown throughout his training journey, a quiet certainty that he belonged here, that his heart was as worthy as any other dog's, regardless of his smaller frame. The closer they drew to their destination, the more Max noticed his family's energy shift. Sarah became quieter, more contemplative. Her father kept checking and rechecking their reservation documents, running through checklists of equipment and supplies with methodical care. Her mother sang softly sometimes, old songs that seemed to calm everyone in the car. They were all tethered to this moment together, all carrying pieces of Max's dream as if it were their own. As they crossed into the region where the national arena stood, the landscape seemed to shimmer with possibility. Other vehicles appeared on the road, some carrying dog crates and equipment, families clearly bound for the same destination. Max found himself watching these other competitors pass by, catching glimpses of massive German shepherds and elegant whippets, sturdy Labradors and graceful Afghan hounds. These were the dogs he would face. These were the animals he'd studied in videos and heard about in hushed conversations at home. Seeing them in motion, even briefly, made the competition feel suddenly real and immediate. The venue itself announced itself gradually. First, there were billboards advertising the championship, their designs gleaming in the afternoon sun. Then banners began to appear, stretching across roads and buildings, proclaiming the greatness of the event in bold letters. Max's nose twitched with interest, picking up the scents of multiple dogs, fresh grass, and something indefinably electric in the air, the energy of anticipation and competition intertwined. When they finally turned onto the grounds of the facility, Max felt his breath catch. The arena rose before them like a cathedral dedicated to the pursuit of excellence. Its structure was vast and intricate, with multiple practice fields visible from the parking area, each one more elaborate than anything Max had trained on before. Massive light towers stood ready to illuminate evening competitions. Stands for spectators rose in tiers around competition areas, currently empty but promising to hold hundreds of watching eyes. The whole complex sprawled across what seemed like endless acres of manicured grounds. Sarah lifted Max gently from the car, and he stood for a moment with his paws on solid earth, looking up at the towering structure before him. Around them, other competitors were arriving too. There were enormous dogs who needed little ramps to step down from vehicles, and smaller dogs like himself, though none quite as small. He could sense their energy, their focus, their quiet confidence built from seasons of success. His family stood beside him, their hands resting gently on his back and head. In that moment, Max felt the weight of his journey settle upon him, not as burden, but as testament. Every training session, every obstacle overcome, every doubt conquered had led here. As he stepped onto the grounds of the national arena, Max felt small in a way he had never felt before, not diminished, but rather humbled by the magnitude of his own courage. The championship course was a masterpiece of complexity, a maze of obstacles that made even the most experienced dogs pause and recalibrate. Max stood at the entrance of the arena, his golden coat gleaming under the afternoon sun, and allowed himself a long moment to take it all in. Before him stretched a landscape transformed into a cathedral of challenges, each element precisely positioned to demand not just speed, but intelligence, grace, and an almost meditative understanding of one's own body and space. The course began innocently enough with a straightforward jump, but immediately thereafter the path twisted into a series of weaving poles that looked deceptively simple from a distance. Up close, Max could see how they demanded absolute precision, how a single mistimed step would cost precious seconds. Beyond those poles stood a towering A-frame obstacle, its peaked structure reaching high into the crystalline sky. The angle was steep, the descent steeper still. Max had conquered A-frames before, but this one seemed to radiate a particular severity, as if it had been designed specifically to test the resolve of a dog who might doubt his own worthiness to be here. He walked slowly along the designated course, his eyes tracking every nuance. There was a tunnel section that curved unexpectedly, forcing competitors to commit to the turn before they could see the exit. It was the kind of obstacle that demanded absolute trust in training, in instinct, in oneself. Max paused before it, inhaling deeply, feeling the cool darkness that waited within. Beyond the tunnel lay a series of broad jumps, their bars set at heights that would require explosive power and perfect trajectory control. The weave gate section came next, a demanding series of vertical barriers that required serpentine precision. Max had practiced weaving countless times with Alina and the others, but this arrangement was particularly intricate, designed to catch any dog who rushed or lost focus. The spacing was exact, the lines unforgiving. A hesitation here would cascade into a poor approach to the subsequent obstacles. Then came what made Max's breath catch slightly in his throat. A narrow plank stretched before him, elevated some distance above the ground. It was the contact obstacle known as the seesaw in some competitions, though this one was broader, more refined. The challenge was not merely to traverse it, but to do so with control, with dignity, demonstrating that even at ground level, even in a moment of vulnerability, a competitor could maintain composure and precision. The final section of the course spiraled back toward the finish, incorporating a series of jumping combinations that required rapid directional changes and sustained athleticism. The bars glinted in the sunlight like golden promises, like tests of faith written in wood and polish. Max completed his walkthrough slowly, methodically, his mind already beginning to construct the invisible map that competitors internalize long before they run their timed attempts. He noted the surface transitions, the subtle slopes of the ground, the angles of approach and departure from each obstacle. He observed how the afternoon light cast certain sections in shadow, how that might affect his perception of distances at speed. He considered the crowd placement, knowing that judges and spectators would line portions of the course, their energy and noise something he would need to mentally filter out. The magnitude of what lay before him crystallized as he stood near the finish line, looking back at the entire arrangement. This was not a course designed for smaller dogs or larger dogs, for young dogs or experienced ones. This was a course designed to reveal truth, to separate the technically sound from the merely fortunate, to determine who had trained with discipline and who had merely trained with optimism. Max felt no crushing weight of doubt. Instead, he felt something clearer and more sustaining. He felt the presence of a leaner's patient instruction echoing in his muscles. He felt the encouragement of his friends, those diverse companions who had believed in him when he had struggled to believe in himself. He felt the memory of every practice session, every small victory, every moment of perseverance. He turned and walked back through the course one more time, slower still, and with each step his confidence grew quieter but deeper, settling into his bones like something ancient and immovable. Max walked the course in his mind 1,000 times that night, committing every turn, every jump, every weave to his heart and muscles. As Max stepped into the championship ring for the first time, every eye in the enormous venue seemed to turn toward the smallest competitor anyone had ever seen. The crowd fell silent, a hush of anticipation settling over the sprawling fairgrounds like morning mist over a meadow. The judges exchanged knowing glances, their expressions unreadable, their paws poised over timing devices that would measure not just speed, but the very essence of determination made manifest. Max's golden coat gleamed under the brilliant sun that poured down upon the championship ring. His breathing was steady, his focus absolute. The weeks of training with his mentor had prepared him not just physically, but spiritually. Every muscle memory from those endless afternoons in the training grounds had woven itself into his being. He had walked this course 1,000 times in his dreams, and now those dreams were becoming reality. The starting bell chimed with crystalline clarity. Max exploded forward with a grace that seemed to defy his small stature. His legs pumped with perfect rhythm, his body flowing like water over the first series of jumps. Each obstacle that approached seemed to shrink before him, not because he had grown larger, but because his spirit had expanded to fill spaces far beyond his physical frame. The crowd gasped as he soared, clearing each bar with inches to spare, landing smoothly and immediately accelerating toward the next challenge. The weave poles approached like a rhythmic dance. Max's small frame proved not a hindrance but a gift, allowing him to navigate the tight turns with surgical precision. His body threaded through the poles in perfect sequence, his tail streaming behind him like a banner of golden light. The rhythm was hypnotic, flawless. He was not simply running through obstacles. He was painting a picture of pure athletic artistry across the arena floor. The dog walk loomed before him, that intimidating structure that rose tall against the afternoon sky. Max climbed with unwavering confidence, his paws finding perfect purchase on each plank. At the peak, he paused for just a fraction of a second, surveying the course that lay ahead, then descended with controlled precision. Not a moment's hesitation, not a single stumble. The judges' pens moved rapidly across their clipboards. Through the tunnel he dove, a blur of gold disappearing into darkness and emerging with undiminished speed. The seesaw approached, and Max adjusted his weight with the understanding of a gymnast, descending with perfect balance. The crowd had moved beyond amazement into something almost reverent. This was not just a small dog competing. This was a soul transcending every expectation, every doubt, every whispered prediction that he did not belong here. The jump sequence that followed required explosive power and split-second timing. Max delivered both with an intensity that seemed to shine from within. His eyes were locked on the course ahead, seeing not the obstacles but the path through them, the space between limitations where possibility lived. Each landing repositioned him perfectly for the next challenge, his body a symphony of coordinated motion. The final stretch called to him like home. The last series of jumps rose before him, and Max attacked them with the heart of a champion. His focus never wavered. His determination burned brighter than the sun overhead. This was everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in during those early morning training sessions when doubt crept in. Every discouraging comment from competitors who whispered that size mattered, every moment of uncertainty he had pushed through, it all culminated in this perfect expression of his will and spirit. The finish line approached like an old friend. Max's legs carried him forward with the strength of conviction, the power of unwavering belief in himself. His breathing was controlled despite the exertion, his movements still graceful despite the intensity. The crowd erupted in sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the championship grounds. When he crossed the final finish line with his time officially recorded, Max had not just competed, he had transcended every limitation anyone had ever imposed upon him. When the announcer called Max's name as the national champion, the crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the arena. The sound washed over him like a warm tide, rolling and endless, filled with voices that had witnessed something beyond the typical measure of victory. Max stood at the edge of the course, his small golden frame trembling with the weight of the moment, his breath still coming in soft, satisfied pants from the race that had just concluded. As he made his way toward the podium, the other competitors lined the path, their paws extended in gestures of genuine congratulation. A massive German shepherd with shoulders broad as a barn door bent down to touch noses with Max, his eyes reflecting something that transcended competition. A sleek greyhound, built for speed in ways Max could never be, placed her chin gently against his head in acknowledgement. These were not the gestures of dogs defeated by a smaller rival, but rather the recognition of something far greater than physical prowess. The judges themselves seemed moved as they placed the medal around Max's neck. The head judge, an elegant old collie whose eyes held decades of experience evaluating champions, leaned close and whispered words meant only for Max. His voice carried the weight of sincerity as he spoke of having witnessed courage transform into excellence, of having seen a heart so determined that it rewrote the very definition of what was possible. Throughout the arena, spectators wiped their eyes. Families who had come merely to watch a sporting event found themselves witnessing something that touched something deeper within them. Parents pointed to Max and spoke to their children about the nature of true strength. Young dogs in the audience watched with shining eyes, suddenly understanding that their own perceived limitations need not define their destinies. The local community members who had known Max since puppyhood stood together, tears streaming freely down their muzzles. Mrs. Alina, the trainer who had believed in him when others doubted, stood with her paw over her heart. The groundskeeper who had stayed late countless evenings to prepare the practice course especially for Max's training sessions, embraced those standing nearest to him. The veterinarian who had worked to keep Max healthy and strong throughout his preparation nodded slowly, as if confirming what she had always known deep in her bones. Max's family circled him with their own bodies, creating a small island of intimacy within the vast celebration. His sister, who had believed in him from the first moment he expressed his dream, rested her head against his back. His mother, who had taught him the meaning of perseverance through her own quiet example, closed her eyes and simply breathed in this moment of vindication and joy. But perhaps most profound were the reactions of those who had initially doubted Max's potential. Various judges from preliminary competitions, breeders who had questioned whether a golden retriever of his modest stature could truly compete at this level, spectators who had watched him in earlier rounds with sympathetic but skeptical expressions, all of them seemed to be experiencing a fundamental shift in their understanding of what excellence truly meant. The stadium fell silent as the national anthem played, and Max stood with his small head held high, the medal catching the light of the late afternoon sun. In that stillness, it became clear to everyone present that they were witnessing the conclusion of a story that had never truly been about winning a championship. This was about a consciousness of heart expanding beyond the borders of assumption and limitation. The crowd gradually quieted, and the arena filled with a profound sense of peace and possibility. Max felt the gentle pressure of his trainer's paw on his shoulder, steadying him, honoring him, celebrating with him. The championship title would be recorded in official documents, his name etched into plaques that would hang in halls of honor. But as Max stood on the podium, the medal hanging around his neck, he realized that the greatest prize had never been the trophy or the title, it had been the journey itself. Max returned to the training grounds not as the smallest puppy anyone had ever pitied, but as a champion whose story would be told for generations to come. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of honey and amber as he walked through the gates, his medal catching the light with a gentle gleam that seemed to mirror the warmth in his heart. The meadows stretched out before him, familiar and beloved, each corner holding memories of early mornings and determined practice sessions, of tumbles and triumphs, of the quiet moments when he had believed in himself even when doubt whispered at the edges of his thoughts. The other dogs gathered around him, their voices rising in joyful celebration, but Max moved through them with a gentle calm that spoke of inner peace. He had learned something precious in his journey to the championship podium, that winning was not about proving something to others, but about discovering what lay within oneself. The medal around his neck was beautiful, yes, but it was merely a symbol of the real transformation that had taken place in his spirit. As the weeks unfolded into months, Max found himself drawn to a new purpose. The training grounds became his sanctuary, not just for his own continued growth, but for nurturing the dreams of those who came after him. He began spending his mornings in the meadow with the younger puppies, watching their clumsy attempts at the jumping course, their uncertain faces as they approached the weave poles for the first time. He recognized himself in their hesitation, in the way their eyes would dart toward the larger dogs with a mixture of admiration and resignation. Max would sit with them in the cool grass, sharing his stories not as a champion speaking down to novices, but as a friend who understood the particular loneliness of being small in a world that seemed designed for bigger creatures. He would tell them about the day he had knocked over the entire first jump, about the times his paws had barely cleared the hurdles, about the nights when exhaustion had tempted him to give up entirely. But he would also speak of the quiet persistence that had carried him forward, the way each small failure had taught him something essential about himself. One small golden retriever, barely half the size of the others in her training group, reminded Max of himself in ways that made his heart ache with recognition. Her name was Clara, and she possessed the same determined spirit that had always burned within him, coupled with the same doubts that threatened to extinguish that flame. Max became her mentor, spending extra hours on the training grounds with her, showing her techniques that had worked for his particular frame, encouraging her to develop strategies that played to her strengths rather than against her limitations. The other mentors at the grounds began to notice the transformation in Max. He had become not just a champion, but a teacher whose presence brought out the best in every puppy who learned from him. There was a gentleness in his instruction, born from the deep understanding of what it meant to struggle against the odds. He never let any student feel that their size or their initial failures defined their potential. Instead, he created an atmosphere of possibility, where each day was an opportunity to grow stronger, faster, and more confident. As seasons changed, rotating through warm summers and quiet winters, the training grounds flourished in new ways. More underdogs arrived, encouraged by Max's example, drawn by the reputation of a champion who had overcome what seemed impossible. The ancient traditions of the Agility Championships evolved, celebrating not merely the fastest or the most physically imposing, but the stories of determination and heart that lay behind each competitor's journey. Max grew older with grace, his movements still fluid and strong, but increasingly marked by the wisdom that only comes from truly understanding one's purpose in the world. He had achieved his dream of winning the championship, but that achievement had opened his heart to something even greater: the privilege of helping others discover their own capacity for greatness. And as he watched new puppies arrive to train, including some even smaller than he had once been, Max smiled, knowing that dreams, like gold, only shine brighter when you never stop believing in them.